What's up, squad? It's your Squid here with a video for my history playlist. If you haven't seen me do a history video like this one before, stick around because you might find you like it, and if you do, you can check out the rest of the history videos playlist for more of the same. There's going to be some reactions in there, but at the moment it's mostly Australian history. Thanks to the supporters of this channel. They're listed here for all they do to help me pay the bills and buy food and eat and all that. They're the real MVPs. If you want to get your name in that list, either as a business or personally, there are various ways to do so in the description. Check it out. The very short version of this story is that Ricky Muir is a former Australian politician who, personally, I think is a bloody good bloke, and who is undoubtedly one of the more politically savvy people of the 2010 to 2020 decade in Australia. More importantly, he's the guy who managed to win an Australian Senate position in 2013 without getting even a single percentage of the primary vote across the nation. Not even 1% of Australian people voted for him, but he still won his election and the very last position in the federal Senate that year. Sort of equivalent to the Congress here in USA. In a nutshell, it's the upper house of parliament. They're generally the place bills either go to get canned or to become legislation, right? And Ricky Muir managed to finagle himself into a spot in the chamber with around 17,000 votes. 17,000 votes out of a country with compulsory voting, right? So over 23 million people in it. Roughly 17 million people who have to vote for someone, otherwise they'll get fined. According to census data, he got roughly 0.51% of the voter base, and he still won the election. So definitely worth a chat about how and why, right? In order to explain how the heck that happened, I'm going to have to explain a few things, like the history of Australian electoral reform, or lack thereof, single-issue micro-parties, preference deals, and obviously the now dreaded Australian propaganda buzzword that is a backroom deal. We've got a lot to get through together before you'll understand and enjoy the Ricky Muir story as much as I do, so now that all the intro stuff and thanking these guys and all that sort of stuff is out of the way, without further ado, I'll see you after the jingle and we can get going. Let's get into it. Viewers of this channel will know I don't like to explain anything without first zooming outwards and taking a big old panoramic view of the situation at hand, looking at the context for how and why something occurred before looking at the actual situation at hand that we're discussing or that I've put in the thumbnail and stuff. So I'll try to be quick, and while this video is about Ricky Muir and his election in 2013, we've first got a flashback about 20 years prior to the 1993 federal election that was won by John Howard of the Liberal Party. Regular viewers of the channel will probably not be surprised to hear that the political mess that eventuated in 2013 had at least been influenced a little bit by that prized fucking idiot, because most political messes in Australia over the last few decades were influenced by John Howard, but I digress, right? For new viewers, please note, the Liberal Party in Australia are liberal in name only. In Australia, the more conservative of the two major parties is named the Liberal Party. It wasn't always like that. The two parties switched from how they started out at some point, just like here in America with the Republicans and the Democrats, you know, like the political ships of Theseus, you know, when does one become the other and all that sort of stuff. Maybe I'll do a video on that at some point. There is a good Knowing Better video on political ships of Theseus. But anyway, the point is that John Howard's capital L Liberal government was elected in 1993 and would stay in power all the way up until the year 2007, the second longest prime ministerial term in Australia's history. The longest was Robert Menzies. I've done a video on that. Check out this playlist. We don't have term limits in Australia, right? So by about the decade and a half mark of Howard's leadership, he was getting quite comfortable, and people in the country were naturally getting quite sick of old mate's bullshit, you know? So in the 2007 federal election, Howard and his party were finally beaten by the Kevin Rudd-led Labor Party. Now, again, I could and I will do a whole video series just on the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years from 2007 to 2013, but given I haven't yet, I'm just going to gloss over it, to be honest, and give you the main gist of it in order for you to understand this story about Ricky Muir. I promise I'll give you the nuance and the itty-gritty bits at some point, but the long story short is that it's very safe to say things didn't go well for the Labor Party in the years after they beat John Howard. Not well at all, right? In a nutshell, it was 6 years of infighting, while they were already in a precarious situation in terms of the power that they wielded among the Houses of Parliament. They only just won the election in 2010, which made things incredibly difficult in the Houses of Parliament, even before factoring in that they were all bending over backwards to betray each other in the hallways at the same time, you know. Australia on the whole had definitely been sick of Howard and the Liberal Party leadership and austerity, but the Labor government they'd elected to replace them wasn't showing any sort of leadership at all, let alone a desirable style of one. So Australia naturally got pretty sick of them pretty quickly too, you know. The combination of both parties' ineptitude led to a creation of a huge swath of single-issue micro-parties leading into the 2013 federal election. And I'll discuss those next, right? Micro-parties in Australian politics are a hot mess, okay? And they're confusing at the best of times, even for someone who's spent their life up to their elbows in the muck of it all, like me. So don't worry if you get confused by it all or you can't follow it all that well, you know what I mean? I will say that some of the bigger micro-parties are hoping to become major parties in the fullness of time, like the Science Party or the Reason Party or the Greens. But for the majority of them, right, that's not the case, and it never will be, and it never was. Generally speaking, instead of being a party that is looking to lead the nation across all sectors and multiple policy points, instead of being a party that wants to govern, that is, a single-issue micro-party is a party that is not even looking to be elected in the first place, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I presume they would all love to actually be elected and get some power like Mr. Ricky Muir ended up doing, but the real political point of a single-issue party is to sway the party that won the election in the direction of their single issue later after the fact. They're generally not looking to win because, I mean, winning with 0.5% of the vote was hitherto unheard of in 2013 and was actually thought to be impossible anyway. But I digress. Micro-parties are essentially just beefed up lobby groups who are trying to prove a mandate within a voting base, right? So, for example, if the No Airport in Badgerys Creek party managed to obtain 1.3% of the nationwide vote, compared to the Legalise Marijuana and Shrooms party, who got 0.5% of this hypothetical vote that I'm just making up, then the argument is that the government of the day can use those statistics as a beneficial means of assessing what the electorate actually wants, right? They can say the people the government serves evidently care more about the proposed airport than the weed and the shrooms because they voted accordingly with those percentages, you know what I mean? Even in the cases of lower voting rates for parties such as the No 5G party or the No Daylight Savings party or the Vaccination and Fluoride Awareness party, for example, right? The government can look at the votes cast some months or years down the line and say with confidence that this percentage of our electorate are fucking brain dead, right? That's the main function of a micro-party, and anyone who tells you any different got interested in politics after Ricky Muir pulled the stunt that he did in 2013, and then they didn't pay proper attention to the reform by Malcolm Turnbull and the Greens in 2016. Incidentally, those were all actual parties from recent elections in Australia, right? Some days when I'm doing research for these videos, I'm really glad I left the country when I did. The Vaccination and Fluoride Awareness Party? Fuck me, Australia, really? Just call it the QAnon party and be done with it. And while I'm off topic, shaking my head at you for a second, it's precisely because of that reason about micro-parties that I get so annoyed when people say, oh, you're throwing your vote away if you don't vote for one of the two major duds, you know? By all means, vote for one of the two incredibly similar purple big guys if you want, but It's a fact that the major parties look at which of the micro parties got the most votes when determining if and how they'll change policy. If you are Australian and you want weed legalised, give the weed party your number one vote, and then whoever you actually want to lead the country, you can give them your number two. Hell, if you like more than one single issue party, maybe you like the Weed and Shrooms party and the No Airport in Badgerys Creek party, right? Maybe you like them both enough to give them both a signal boost. You can put the major party that you want to form government, either the Labor Party or the Liberal Party, generally speaking, as your third or fourth preference for all I or they will care, right? Labor or Liberal is basically always going to win the election. No matter if you put them at first or you put them at 14th, they work together to make it so that they're the two big dogs in the yard, right? And I'll say it again, the Weed Party definitely won't win, regardless of how you vote, but the people that do win will see them as a big enough of a deal based on the raw amount of number one votes that theoretically they might try to rectify things to get those number one votes themselves by the next election, because it's just a single issue, right? So your vote still counts, and it arguably counts more at that point, if you ask me. Preferential voting, in my opinion, is the most democratic form of voting across the board, and I guess I should explain that next, right? If you've never heard of preferential voting, it works, and it's pretty simple, though it's best described visually, I find. So look at the screen for a second if you've just been listening to my dulcet tones so far, because this is a standard example of a voting slip from a federal election in the upper house. Sorry, the writing's so small. It's a big bit of fucking paper, right? You can either put a 1 next to the person you like above the line and be done, or you can number as many boxes from 1 to whatever the total is that year below it, right? I numbered the entire page from 1 to 158 one year to ensure I put a bloke named Fred Nile at 158th. I'll do a video on that cretin at some point too, but in short, he's a zealot who doesn't believe in separation of church and state, and I wanted him to be last on my ticket, literally whenever I saw his name. Once the first preferences are all counted, right, and tallied in an election, the election doesn't actually end there like it does in America and in other parts of the world. And this is where the visual description helps best, I think, right? At the point the votes are all counted, the person who came last is eliminated from the count, yet the counting continues. The number one votes that had previously gone to the person who came last are looked at for their second preference and distributed accordingly to those people who are still in the election, right? Hopefully, I've found a cool little graphic that I can just put up there. It's going to take me a while to make my own, but we'll see how we go, right? Subsequently, once the tally is counted, the person who came last in the second count is eliminated as well, and their votes are distributed accordingly, taking into account the second preferences of the people that had voted for them initially, and the third preferences of the voters who had been put into that pile in the second round from the first pile in the first round. We repeat this process until there are 2 people left, and the higher total gets the seat in Parliament, right? I hope you're following me. Hopefully I found a thing online. See how that makes sense visually, right? But it would have been a word salad if you hadn't looked. Anyway, what this ensures is that while not all Australians got who they wanted to lead from the election, all Australians were able to effectively say, look, if I can't have that one, I'll take that one. Or that one. Just for the love of God, not that guy I put last, you know? And it's taught by most that this eliminates polarisation and eliminates rusted-on, dyed-in-the-wool type voters who just vote for who their parents did without thinking. But those people do well and truly exist in Australia, and I'd actually argue that they exist in a higher percentage per capita than here in America. So, yeah. I have exactly 0 statistics or research to back that up. It's just a personal opinion. But either way, I think preferential voting is a better system than first past the post, and the most votes wins, right? I think malinformed people are, generally speaking, the problem with politics globally at the moment, and preferential voting makes it harder for someone to hoodwink the public to gain power, in a nutshell. And that's a good segue, actually, to get back to Ricky Muir, right? Because the Liberal government, reminder, they're actually conservative. The Liberal government actually worked together with the Greens Party, right, to change the laws surrounding preferential voting in 2016, outwardly and openly trying to prevent another Ricky Muir from happening like it had in the prior election. Incidentally, okay, the Greens present themselves as these bleeding heart lowercase l liberals, and they betrayed their entire base by working with the uppercase L liberals back then in 2016. If their voter base consisted of anything at all other than vapid, do-nothing students in their early 20s and self-aggrandizing stoners of all ages who don't engage with society or politics like they think they do, the Greens would have lost anything even resembling political support at that point in 2016, and they'd have dwindled entirely out of relevance by now. Unfortunately, that isn't the case, and that didn't happen, but let it be known, okay, that the Australian Greens are a festering sack of class traders, because they absolutely, categorically, emphatically are. If you're someone in Australia who thinks they like the Greens, or you've done some lazy analysis and you're not really interested in politics, but you think the Greens are the party for you, don't feel bad. Just do what you're told, right? You should vote for the Reason Party. It's led by a woman named Fiona Patten. I'll repeat. If you're a bleeding heart lefty that doesn't really pay attention and is shocked to hear me say that I think you shouldn't support the Greens because I'm a bit of a lefty and I smoke weed and all of that sort of stuff, the Reason Party are the ones making meaningful change, and they're not the ones selling you out at every chance they can get, okay? Reason are lefties with principles. The Greens are fucking watermelons, mate. Anyway, back on topic. This time explaining compulsory voting. I told you the context would take a while, right? And my rants aren't helping, but we'll stay on task. We'll get to Ricky Muir soon, I promise. In Australia, every single person aged 18 or over must vote in federal, state and local council elections. Every 3 years federally, every 4 years for state and local. As an Australian citizen, failing to present at the polling booth on election day results in a fine, and the fines get higher in monetary value for every subsequent election that you miss. It doesn't matter where you are in the world or how you think you could get around it. Putting it pretty simply, you just can't, mate. I'm expected to vote by mail in Australian elections while I live here in America, and I would have been posted a fine in the mail in late 2019 had I not prepared and posted my vote in the mail in late 2019. Feel free to put your tinfoil hat on for this if you want, but with a combination of full universal healthcare in Australia, as well as the child tax credits parents are eligible for, amongst many other social benefits denied to the American public even though they pay more tax, the Australian government has details of every single person from birth, and they will find you if you don't vote. It's really that simple. If you're an adult in Australia, you have to vote, and you'll get fined if you don't. That being said, if you're an adult in Australia, there's absolutely nothing, not a single thing, saying you have to know who you're voting for. There is nothing saying you have to take the process seriously. No one is forcing you via monetary fine that progresses as you go to stay politically engaged. They're just forcing you to rock up and put a number in a box on election day every 3 or 4 years or so, right? Or not even that in reality. They're forcing you to rock up to the polling booth, take your voting slip from the official. That's it. You can draw a dick on it or leave it completely blank if you want, so long as you get your name marked off and take it from them on the day and then go over and put it in the box to be counted. That's that, you know. It's that, in this not-so-humble YouTuber's opinion, that is the main problem with compulsory voting, right? Too many mal-informed people voting against their own interests precisely because they're not interested, right? I'm a firm believer that if only the politically engaged people were voting, or if you had to pass an ethics test before being allowed to vote, for example, Australia would be a better place and most of the problems we faced as a nation would be solved overnight, right? But there I go on my philosophical soapbox with my extreme opinions again, getting sidetracked. I'll get back on task, okay? I feel like I've explained all the context that set up Ricky Muir's run now. So I reckon we should recap and then get into it, okay? So, in 2013, in Australia, there was a general nationwide apathy towards politics. We had just had 16 years of Howard and Liberal Party austerity, followed by 6 years of infighting and incompetence from the Rudd-Gillard Labor governments. Combine 2 decades of shit politics with compulsory voting, preferential voting, and a million single-issue parties in Australia at the time, and we're nearly there, actually. We're nearly at the point where the light bulb flickers on and Ricky Muir being elected to the Senate will make sense, right? Ricky Muir had his nose to the ground in the years leading up to 2013. He led and still leads an active lifestyle of four-wheel driving, hunting, participation in local sport, as well as recreational fishing. His growing contempt for politicians and the political class reached a peak around 2012, when the Queensland state government passed what they referred to as Antihoon Laws, which restricted recreational car events and clubs heavily, as well as creating mandatory minimum sentences for speeding and for car modification-related offences. A part of the Anti-Hoon Laws also compromised compulsory vehicle impounds for first-time offenders, which, quite frankly, is a bit of a dick move, if you ask me. Say what you want about the necessity of traffic laws and all of that jazz. It's widely agreed that Queensland took it way too far back then, you know? And it was directly because of those laws being passed that Ricky Muir agreed to run for a seat with what was known as the Australian Motoring Enthusiasts Party. Here's that example of a voting slip from the upper house again, right? Prior to the law being changed before the 2016 election, for the entire history of Australia, had you chosen to number one box above the line, your vote still had preferences all the way down as if you had voted below the line. Despite you not numbering the boxes below the line yourself, if you had put a 1 in the field that said Motoring Enthusiasts Party, the Motoring Enthusiasts Party got to choose where your preferences went. They had to set it up prior to the election, but every party did it, and every party had deals with other parties on where they'd put each other in their preferences and all that sort of stuff. Remember before when I said the two big dogs rig it so that no one else can win each election period? The Labor and the Liberal parties, despite supposedly being mortal enemies that want to remove each other from power every 3 to 4 years, locally, at state level and federally, preference each other higher than anyone else every single time. They want you to hate the opposition, sure, but they also know how best to consolidate power, so it's not really the opposition you think it is, you know what I mean? Nowadays, the parties don't get to pick where their preferences go. If you just put a 1 above the line, your vote is thrown out when the person you voted for is. Incidentally, how's that for a waste of a vote? Voting for a micro-party now is wasteful unless you lay out all of your preferences below the line. But yeah, as I've said, in 2013, that's not how it worked. And this is where Ricky Muir's genius comes in. Prior to the federal election, in 2013, Ricky Muir and the Australian Motoring Enthusiasts Party observed what the major parties were doing in preparation for the day. The major parties, just like in every other election in the history of the country, right, made preference deals with each other, and then they went out to the micro parties with the scraps, you know, with the third or fourth preference, effectively ensuring that none of them would ever win a position of power, right? The literal only way anyone could break through that loggerhead or that logjam of the Liberals and the Labor Party preferencing each other was if pretty much every single micro party agreed to preference the same one singular micro party above all the majors at that election, right? Who would even try to unite such people under one preference deal sort of banner, right? You've probably already guessed that our boy Ricky Muir did exactly that. Coming into election day, the Australian Motoring Enthusiasts Party had preference deals with 25 other micro parties, and as a result, would turn a 0.51% first preference return at the election into a 14.5% collection by the time the votes had finished being counted. 9 of these 23 separate micro-parties had polled more initial first preference votes than the Australian Motoring Enthusiasts Party. But because of the weight of the second preferences and the third preferences and the fourth, fifth, sixth preferences Muir was able to negotiate prior to the election, he beat them out and he won overall. Some of the parties he'd fleeced had received more than 5 times the total votes he had on a first preference, right? So the Palmer United Party had over 100,000 votes compared to the Motoring Enthusiast Party, who had 17,000, for example. The difference being that Ricky Muir and the Motoring Enthusiasts Party had known what they were doing, and Clive Palmer is a fatty McFuckhead, in my opinion. Ricky Muir would be the victim of some political tomfoolery by the major parties, and he would lose his Senate seat in 2016. I touched on it before. The Liberals wanted to tweak things to be harder for the little guy and to prevent preference deals being able to be made by micro-parties. They would not have been able to pass this legislation if it hadn't been for the Greens' support in both houses of Parliament. And so I blame the Greens more than the Libs when I think about it, if I'm honest. The traitorous, fake woke turncoats that they are. Legit. If you're an Australian and there is anything you take from this video, please let it be that you should not vote for those Benedict Arnold, Judas, Isildur at the foot of the mountain, fucking watermelon rat fuck Greens ever again. Literally, pissing in your polling booth will be more effective in terms of progressive action, at least you'll feel better at that point, you know? You'll feel satisfied. Your body will shiver a little bit or something, you know? It's pissing in your polling booth is more proactive than voting for the Greens. But anyway, much like with the video I did on John Howard and the Children Overboard scandal, I'm going to finish off the video with a snippet of a speech by Ricky Muir, and these small sound bites of publicly available content, don't come at me ABC, were each part of his maiden speech to Parliament after being elected, and the link to the full half-hour-long speech he gave is in the description below. It's well worth watching, and I think it'll give you an indication of the man he is and the politician that he was. I didn't vote for him then. I didn't know who he was until after he did his stuff, right? But I would now if I was given another chance, if he was running again. He's a good man. A big thanks, once again, goes out to the financial supporters of the channel, both on a commercial and a personal level. Doing this sort of stuff without your financial help would not be possible. Check the links in the description for the various ways to get your name in that graphic along with those mad dogs, or, you know, don't. I'm super thankful for all your views regardless. Do me a solid, hit the subscribe button, watch some more of my content, and leave a comment on this video. Like it if you learned something. I'll see you when I look at your squad. You'll see me when you look at me. Here's Ricky.
Thank you, Senator Lazarus. Pursuant to order, I now call Senator Muir to make his first speech, and I ask honourable senators that the usual courtesies be extended to him. Senator Muir.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is not my first... Hang on, it is. Finally, it may have taken 8 months and 4 days, but finally I'm standing here in this great chamber presenting my first speech. One of my crossbench colleagues mentioned this morning, this must be one of the most anticipated inaugural speeches of all time. Thanks, Senator Linehelm, no pressure. I apologise in advance in case I don't deliver. I ticked all the boxes to qualify to become a senator, just as I imagine our forefathers would have intended when creating the independent upper house in 1901. I honestly believe those watching at home, reading online, or reading in the papers should always have the opportunity to stand up to represent their peers. Our Senate and the decisions which govern our lives should not be solely represented by the political class. But that still doesn't explain why I gave up that idyllic lifestyle to sit here in this great chamber with great pride to be able to present this speech. I was unsatisfied that our elected representatives were bound by preconceived party positions, which in turn goes against the very definition of representative democracy, as the voices of the people that they were supposed to represent seemed to somewhat fall on deaf ears. If every person sitting in this room voted to represent their state after taking on their constituents' views, like I believe the Senate was originally designed to achieve in 1901 when Federation was formed, and if all senators voted with their conscience, only then will we see the true representative democracy that Australia could be proud of. And that is why I stood up to be heard. I, like so many other Australians, am fed up with big political campaigns where on the lead up to an election we are told there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead, or there is no way a GST will ever be part of our policy, or perhaps in more modern times be told that there is a mandate to repeal a carbon tax, only to find out after the election that this so-called mandate also includes fixing the budget by hurting the disadvantaged in a barrage of measures that were mute in the election campaign. And what justification is there for this? It usually sounds something like this. We had to make the hard decisions because of the mess that was left behind because of those opposite. Is this fair on the Australian public who voted under the impression that government would honour its word? And I can answer that, and the simple answer is no. Since being elected, there has been plenty of commentary on how the voting system is broken and undemocratic, which in my eye completely misses the point. For my crossbench colleagues and I to be elected, people had to be voting for parties other than the major parties, and they did, a huge 24% in the Senate. In my view, if you want a simple explanation of how this could occur, all the major parties need to do is take a long, hard look in the mirror. I can tell you now, the system is not broken and does not need to be fixed. The disconnect from the average Australian, the way you treat the voters of Australia by saying one thing but doing another, is in my view why voters are looking for alternatives. Then there has been statements thrown around such as the Senate is dysfunctional and unworkable. Yet when speaking to many around these halls, it seems pretty much business as usual. Perhaps people are getting the Senate and the government confused. That doesn't sound like democracy to me. There are so many other different areas I could talk about today, but I don't want to put you all to sleep. My journey to date has been exciting, fast, emotional and intriguing. A change of lifestyle that without prior experience in politics I could not possibly prepare myself for. A change that would have been impossible to adapt to without strong support of my family and friends. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge my family and friends who could not be here today. I received numerous apologies for those who could not make it, and I would like to thank them all. My father, 2 sisters, grandparents from both sides of the family, including my wife. I know you would all be here if you could, and I honestly appreciate all the support that you have shown and offered since the election. I would like to thank those who gave and offered assistance while I embarked on this whirlwind journey. I've been given so much advice I could not possibly ever remember it. I would like to thank my family and friends that are here. My mum, Peter, Daniel. I don't know where to start. There's people everywhere. Maury, Caleb, Matt, Ozzy, Kiara, Tracy. I won't go through my kids quite yet. Everybody else who I've missed, I thank you all for being here. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me. I would like to make a special mention to my best friend, who happens to be sitting in the gallery. For 30 years we've maintained a bond that has been impossible to break. We have supported each other through hard times and good, fought occasionally, maybe at times regularly, but always been here for each other no matter what. Over the years we have constantly competed each other. As we were young, over things like who had the biggest muscles. Now, who has the biggest belly? Who could jump the dirt bike the highest or the longest, or who was quicker on the drag strip? It was me, for the record. Now that is permanently on the record. But I suppose, to be kind, I better mention that although I may have been quicker on the drag strip, I reluctantly informed tell you all that I can't catch him on a local hill climb track.